Hey everyone, Nick Yuskevich here with Daily Fantasy Winners. It is another edition of Tee to Green, and for this week's episode, it is about the Farmers Insurance Open, and this is located in La Jolla, California. It is along the Pacific Coast, just north of San Diego, specifically at Torrey Pines Golf Course. And granted, this was a long time ago, probably about 15 plus years ago. I have played both these courses, both the North and the South. Not sure how much it's going to help here with strategy and all that, but might maybe a little bit here and there with a couple of details. But with that, we will just jump right on into what you guys need to know about this tournament. So, like I said, at Torrey Pines Golf Course, there are two golf courses, the North and the South courses. As far as Thursday and Friday action, half the golfers will play at the North course on Thursday, and half the golfers will play on the South course on Thursday, and then they will switch for Friday. So 18 at each course, both Thursday and Friday, and then the cut will be applied, and then it's just the South course for Saturday and Sunday. So 54 holes at the South, 18 at the North, and then 18 for each course before the cut is applied. And as far as the field goes, it is a pretty much a full field here for this event, and it's a fairly strong field. It's not like a major championship quality or WGC quality field, but at the same time, certainly on the stronger side as far as the normal PGA Tour tournaments are concerned, and absolutely easily the best as far as the best so far of the 2017 portion of this year is concerned. So let's dive right into the details about Torrey Pines in both courses. The North course tips out at 7,258 yards, while the South course tips out at 7,698 yards. Both are par 72s, and the North course actually used to be 7,052 yards, but it was lengthened about 200 extra yards this year, but also the course went through a redesign, and because Torrey Pines is a public golf course and gets a lot of public play, the redesign of this course made some of the fairways a little bit wider, actually, specifically with the North course. So even though it was a little bit of length was added and the fairways were a little bit wider, at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference from any way, shape, or form as far as a strategy standpoint goes. Just an interesting note if you're wondering why something maybe wasn't adding up as far as when you were doing some of your course history research. As far as differences between the North and the South is definitely the tougher course, and it is also the longest, actually, on the entire PGA Tour, by over 100 yards, actually. So that's definitely something to keep note of, and we'll touch on more of that in just a second here. And you should also keep in mind, actually, is that this course is, of course, on the Pacific Coast, like I mentioned, and it's very, very close to sea level. That basically means the ball won't travel as far, especially with temperatures here often in, I think it's supposed to be in the high 50s, lower 60s here, this week. So, and usually there's some decent wind here being on the coast as well. The fairways are probably about average width, but given the length of the course and being exposed to more wind, the fairways are actually played a little bit narrower than they actually may appear. I heard a stat earlier, I think, or I read it, or a couple different places, that usually only about, for the entire field, about half the fairways are hit here on average, and that's pretty low, certainly. And so, and then as far as the rough length is concerned, the rough here usually isn't that friendly. It's usually on the tougher side. It's not U.S. Open tough, and when the U.S. Open was here in 2008, they let it grow out quite a bit, and that was a little bit different. But still, versus the average course, and definitely what they've been playing with the last few weeks here on the PGA Tour, the rough here, it's not fun to be in. We'll just leave it at that. And so in any case, like I said, the U.S. Open was here in 2008, where only the South course was used, and actually the U.S. Open is returning here in 2021. So those are some things to note. Definitely a longer track, definitely tougher. And so essentially at the end of the day here, unless wet conditions come about, which is not expected, and it's on the North course and someone plays just out of their freaking mind, there just aren't going to be any 59s this week. I think the playtime is probably over for some of these guys going low here over the last handful of weeks. But Eagle information. So we got two courses here, of course, the North and the South. There are 4 par 5s on each golf course, par 72s. And then on the North course, we usually have about a handful of Eagles on hole 1, a handful of Eagles on hole 9, a handful of Eagles on hole 14, and then usually about 10 Eagles actually on 18. And the lengths of these par 5s are 519, 547, 523, and 516. So essentially at the end of the day, golfers of all length can hit all these greens into and make eagles. And actually, number 2 is a drivable par 4. We usually don't see eagles there. We might see like 1 or 2, but players do try and drive that there. So maybe like 1 or 2 eagles there. But and then as far as the South course goes, these are much longer. We have 560, 614, 614, and 570. And the 560 par 5 on the 6th, that we usually see. It really does more depend on the direction of the wind and what they do with the tee markers, because they'll move them up sometimes. But usually we see about somewhere in that 5 to 10 eagle range on hole 6, and then on hole 9, it's either no eagle. We usually can count on one hand how many eagles we see on hole 9. Hole 13 really depends on where the tee markers are and what the wind's doing. Some years we've seen none. Some years we've seen up to as many as 10. And then hole 18, we see a handful of eagles there. Now, what does all this mean? What's interesting here is, even though I was basically saying that you get a handful of eagles on all the par 5s on the north, and then up to 10 on hole 18, and then we don't get as many eagles quite as much on the south. The south actually, you play 54 holes at, and then there's 18 holes at the north. Now, granted, there is a cut applied between Friday and Saturday, but still, there's obviously a lot more times the south's being played than the north, and the north has more eagles total overall. So it's something to keep in mind here that while distance can help you here with eagles a little bit, and even medium length hitters are fine for some of these guys to get eagles on the south course, keep in mind there will still be more eagles made on the north course, and like you don't necessarily, like you're not required to have a longer hitter to record eagles here. Does it help a little bit? Yes, it does. Historically, it shows that the medium to longer hitters have a little bit of an advantage, but is by no means a requirement. Freddie Jacobsen actually has the most eagles here over the last couple of years, actually, and he's one of the shortest hitters on tour. So that just kind of gives you an idea that it can happen. So let's see here. I think that's it as far as the details of the golf course and what you need to know from a DFS standpoint. Strategy. This is a little bit lengthy, so I will try and do this as efficiently as possible. Looking at stats of the previous few years at the Farmers, there are a few things to note. The last few years have had tougher conditions. Windy and dryness has been the common theme here, along with the South course being lengthened. Those have been the primary reasons for why there have been some tougher scores here over the last handful of years. But when looking at this from a statistics standpoint, 2016 was a bit of an outlier last year. If you remember the Farmers last season, it probably had the toughest conditions of any tournament to close a tournament last season. There were massive winds. It was cold. It was rainy a lot on Sunday. There were multiple weather delays throughout the day, and they actually ended up having to finish on Monday in extreme winds. And Brett Snedeker actually shot a 69 in the final round, while everyone was shooting in the upper 70s, lower 80s. It was incredible. Snedeker probably had the round of the year, actually, and it was one of the best rounds that no one talked about last season once as the year moved on, and kind of went under the radar for how great of a year 2016 was for golf in general. So and essentially, just if you really want to look into it, just search Farmers Insurance Open 2016 on YouTube, and you'll get an idea of what I'm talking about. But basically, where I bring this to as it relates to this year is that when we're doing our research, the strokes gained tee to green players last year essentially didn't have their edge because it was just so brutal that it just made it random last year. It really wasn't a strong correlation for what type of a golfer did well last year. It just kind of evened it out for a lot of the different players, and there really wasn't a big correlation. But traditionally, though, when we're doing our research for this year, if you go back to before 2016, strokes gained off the tee has the strongest correlation of the strokes gained statistics. And this definitely makes sense given the balance of the course between how long it is and the desire you need to have to be able to put it in the fairway. Like I said, the rough's not exactly that friendly, but it is long. So it's definitely a strokes gained off the tee standpoint. And so strokes gained approaching the green comes in second. It's a decent drop off from off the tee to approaching the green, but still approaching the green comes in second. And essentially it is a strokes gained tee to green course more than a short gamer's course, so to speak, as far as around the green or putting and things of that nature in terms of what comes up. And by the way, this does not mean that players who don't fit this category are all off limits. You shouldn't just say that if somebody has a great short game and their strokes gained tee to green is completely off limits. Don't look at it like that. But at the same time, you do kind of want to look more in that direction, generally speaking. So Next, also being stronger off the tee to green doesn't necessarily mean you are a bomber either. It does usually have, so the strokes gained tee to green people and the strokes gained off the tee guys usually are a little bit longer off the tee, generally speaking, but it's not black and white. It's not as simple as the thing is, oh, bombers are just automatically gaining strokes off the tee. That's definitely not the case. So make sure you're looking into that a little bit. And so, also, when looking at stats, I want to emphasize this, and this goes for everything you do in DFS golf research right now, especially this time of year. Just make sure you're looking at 2017 and 2016 statistics. 2017 statistics are still a very limited sample size. Some guys have only played a couple of tournaments, and even the guys that have played like 5 tournaments at this point, we're only talking about up to 20 rounds then, even if someone's played like 5 tournaments. And that really isn't that many when you consider, we go through the different seasons in terms of what types of golf courses we're playing. I mean, we had the fall season, which is completely random, and then we have Hawaii, and now we're in California. So it really is it's just 5 rounds is really or 5 tournaments and up to as many as 20 rounds. That's still not the greatest sample size in the world. So just make sure you use at least 2017 and 2016. In some cases, you may even want to go farther back than that. So to conclude kind of this whole thing about strokes gained off the tee thing, strokes gained off the tee is good, and strokes gained tee to green is good, but you don't have to be 100% strict about it. That's the general simple point I want to make there. GPP wise for strategy, generally speaking, the bombers probably will be used more from an ownership standpoint. People are going to see the length of the course, and they're going to automatically think bombers, and they're automatically going to see par 5s, and they're going to think eagles require bombers here, which isn't quite necessarily the case. It helps a little, but it's not as much as people will make it out to be. So keep that in mind for GPP ownership. Some other things to look at. Players who generally do well on tougher courses that promote things like strokes gained tee to green and strokes gained off the tee, the U.S. Open type golf courses, often a lot of the time the longer ones, those are the kind of golfers that'll probably do well here. Basically, like I said, because the U.S. Open's been at Torrey Pines, and it's a type of course that's long and it's more difficult, especially over the last handful of years, and probably should be this year as well. And what else do we want to look at? Yes, if you're only making a few lineups, you want to avoid if you're only making a few lineups, you want to avoid players who were just playing last week at Abu Dhabi last week. It is a 12-hour time differential, I believe, and these guys arrived in San Diego on Monday, I think later in the day or even at night on Monday, and so players mostly on that kind of a time difference on a short turnaround usually don't do that well. It's not every single time, but generally speaking, most often they won't do as well as they would perform on average with proper rest or little to no time travel or time zone differential, if you will. And so, and if you're making a lot of lineups, I would just limit the exposure. Like, for guys like Dustin Johnson, Ricky Fowler, if you're making 100+ lineups in GPPs, then you don't want to fade them then. But, if you're just making like 2 or 3 GPPs, then I would just say, yeah, I would probably tend to avoid some guys like Dustin, Ricky, and I believe Byung Hun An was another guy that was over there, and maybe a couple others, but I know those 3 at least. So, next note, you want to be careful with course history here. There are some names here with really good odds per dollar. You can check that out on DailyFantasyWinners.com. That is updated. And some of those guys that do have the great odds per dollar usually have good course history here. A lot of people are going to use these guys in their lineups, both cash and GPP, and we want to mainly focus on GPP here. And I will have a full GPP list of the cheaper guys I would consider fading on the forum in DailyFantasyWinners.com. But I will just tell you right now, just to kind of get this out of the way, Tiger Woods will definitely be on that list. Despite his great course history, this is one of the worst places for him to start up at here in 2017. His only competitive tournament, obviously, since 2015 is the Hero World Challenge in December. And a lot of people like the Tiger, play through the whole tournament. He made a lot of birdies. Well, while he did make a lot of birdies, those fairways were extremely friendly, and there was basically no rough to hit out of on that course. He also made a lot of bogeys, which caused him to finish 15th out of 18 people in that entire field. So, and if you paid close attention to that tournament, he ran out of gas a lot of the time. 3 of the 4 rounds, he really stumbled down the stretch. And so now he's going to the longest course on the PGA Tour on a significantly tougher golf course where he can't get away with errant tee shots and dealing with much more brutal rough and more awkward stances because it's a very hilly course, and it's just not it's not a good fit here for Tiger to kind of come back to. If this were a more friendly or scoreable course, this would be a completely different discussion. I wouldn't be probably this strongly opinionated on it. But this is just not a spot I would play him at all. And I'm really not including any potential WD risk, which could really hurt you, obviously. I don't think that'll happen. I really hope it doesn't happen. I don't want to see any golfer have to withdraw from an injury standpoint. But in any case, I would just say Tiger will be on that list just to kind of get that out of the way here, because I know there will be a lot of interest on him. And so there'll be more players on that list too, of course, on DailyFantasyWinners.com. One last note here, and this is important. This tournament, the Farmers Insurance Open, has historically, all over the last few years, has been one of the most successful tournaments for Daily Fantasy Winners in terms of strategy, and it mainly has to do with fading the higher-owned, lower-salary players, as well as recommending limited exposure to the popular, expensive guys. The main point here is weird things happen at this event. This course is much different than what the players have been playing on lately, whether it's been, a couple of the European Tour events over at La Quinta last week at PGA West, the Sony Open, or Kapalua. Like, all those courses, they're not really similar in any way to what Torrey Pines is. And there's a lot more wind usually at this course, and wind causes variance. You can get some bad breaks here pretty easily with bad lies in the rough, and it's a public golf course. It's just, you can get some bad breaks here. So just kind of a combination of all this can mislead people who love going with recent performance people and guys who are just in great form. But those might be guys that aren't really that great strokes gained tee to green, and it's just the recent performance really won't line up with what fits at this course and some of the bad breaks that happen. So this is where, of all tournaments on PGA Tour, this one's near the top as far as the tournaments. I would highly recommend avoiding the popular lower salary guys, essentially. So keep that in mind. And this is for GPPs, of course, when it comes to ownership, because remember, cash games, we don't care about ownership, of course. I think we're ready for picks. No, one last thing. As far as we're going to get into weather quickly before we get into picks. Because some people have been asking more about weather lately, and I just want to kind of touch up on this. As far as weather goes, and this is only Tuesday as I'm recording this, and you can check in Wednesday evening if you want, but the winds will be consistently, it looks like, about 10 to 15 miles an hour, maybe some gusts a touch higher than that, with the exception of Thursday morning, where there's supposed to be little to no wind. However, remember, there are players teeing off on both courses both days. So it's not a morning and afternoon deal Thursday and Friday. All golfers will be on the golf course at the same time within a 2-hour window between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. local time. So there really isn't much of an advantage here to look at from a tee time wave standpoint. There just isn't. So there really isn't much to worry about here as far as weather goes. And there probably won't be for a while, just because next week is Phoenix, which is usually good weather. Then you have the AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am, and that's at 3 different courses. And so I think Riviera would be the soonest point we could get to a potential tee time weather advantage. And if not there, because weather's usually pretty good there, we'll be at Florida then, over at the Honda. So it's going to be a while, I think, before we really need to dive into anything tee time related that will give us much of an advantage. But of course, we'll address it if it does come up before then. So let's move on to the picks. Jason Day and Hideki Matsuyama, they're the two most expensive guys. Jason Day is at $11,400. Hideki Matsuyama is $11,200. They're 1A and 1B for me, and Jason is the better player, and as many know, I think he's the best player at any course pretty much at any time. But I will admit that Hideki is, I think, the slightly safer play here. This is mainly just because Hideki's tee to green game, historically and especially as of late, is just been off the charts, and his recent performance is more based on that and his scrambling as opposed to strokes gained putting, which is what some of these last couple tournaments have been more about. And so when I just said, recent performance may be misleading lately, for Hideki, I don't think that's the case. And so if you're doing a cash lineup and you want to use a top guy, Hideki's probably the guy I would go with. I think him and Jason are both fine, but I'd probably just give a slight edge to Hideki there. But as far as GPPs and as far as winning the golf tournament, there's a part of me with the upside of Jason, I might slightly lean toward him. We're really, we're looking at very minimal differences here. So at the end of the day, I just feel like I got to put both of them in there to just say I like both the two most expensive guys. No real concerns, too many big concerns about either. And then as far as one other pick I'll give you on here, Brooks Koepka at 9,900. Very strong tee to green player, very strong off the tee, and he plays usually historically very well on the tougher golf courses and in the tougher tournaments. And so, and also, this is just a reminder, definitely go to DailyFantasyWinners.com for the rest of the picks in the forum section. The last couple videos, a couple of the picks haven't turned out as well, a couple have been okay, but and hopefully they start doing a little bit better this week. But many of the other picks we've done on DailyFantasyWinners.com in the forum have gone much better, and so it's just a reminder, we have a lot more there for you to check out there if you visit the website. So, and that is it for this video. So thank you for watching. I'm at Nick Yuskevich on Twitter. Daily Fantasy Winners is on Twitter at DFSnerd. And then if you like these videos, please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All right, guys, good luck.